Okay. Welcome to tonight's Economy, Housing, the Arts Policy and Accountability Committee. My name is Councillor Rory Vaughan and I'm the chair of the committee. Just to remind participants of a few housekeeping points, if people could keep microphones muted unless you are speaking, and please wait until I call you before speaking, if that's okay. Item 1 is apologies for absence. We've got just one apology at the moment, which is Councillor Anne Rosenberg for lateness. She's trying to log in at the moment. I don't think that there are any other apologies for absence unless there's any late ones of, well, there can't be, I guess, because
no, Chair, no.
Everyone's here. Okay, item 2 is the roll call and declarations of interest. We know that Councillor Rosenberg's a bit late, so we will speak to her later, but I'll now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. Councillor Alford.
I'm here, hopefully, and I don't have any declaration of interest.
Councillor Brown.
Present. No declarations of interest.
Councillor Rowbottom.
Present.
Okay. Thank you, and we're hoping that Councillor Rosenberg will join us soon. Item 3, minutes of the previous meetings. Are the minutes of the meetings held on the 10th of November 2020 and of 25th of January 2021 agreed?
Agreed by me.
Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Thank you. I'll take those as agreed. There's an item called general public questions, but no residents or members of the public have registered to speak to ask questions. So we'll move straight on to one of our clearly our main items tonight, which is the Arts Commission recommendations. And this report sets out the 8 key recommendations made by the Arts Commission in its final report for consideration by the Council for adoption. We've got a number of guests, all of whom are extremely welcome tonight, and thank all of them for making the time to come and address us this evening. First of all, can I just remind the officers to introduce themselves when they first address the committee? So I think the officers will introduce the report, and then we've got a number of members of the Arts Commission and at least one representative from HF Arts Fest who've kindly joined us this evening, who will also be speaking. So I think we've got Yvonne Thompson to introduce the report alongside Thomas Dodd and Karen Gailey, and I think that Councillor Andrew Jones will be speaking after that. And we'll also hear from members of the Arts Commission, which are the Chair Jonathan Church, Lead Consultant Richard Watts, Member Victoria Brignall, and another member, I think hopefully Cynthia D'Ambrosi may be joining us as well. And I know that Melanie Knock from HF Arts Fest has also kindly joined us tonight. So thank you to everyone for attending this evening. And Yvonne, did you want to kick off the report?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Yvonne Thompson. The report's quite self-explanatory. It takes you through the 2-year journey. It has been the Hammersmith and Fulham Objective Arts Commission. One of the things that probably is quite useful to highlight is the dedication and commitment of the Arts Commission themselves. Instead of a process that may have taken just over a year, it's been a 2-year-long process. They've been incredibly diligent throughout that process. As Hammersmith and Fulham officers, we've stood back and we've watched the process, and it's been pretty incredible, I've got to say. They've come up with 8 pretty robust recommendations, which are contained within Appendix 9 of the report as a smart action plan for those. One of the things I would like to highlight, I suppose, are the early successes of the report, including maintaining Dance West within the borough itself. As they were about to leave the borough, they're now based at Sands End Arts and Community Centre, giving them a sustainable income stream and making sure that they're there for our residents. They work with about 15,000 residents a year. Kindred Studios, also an early success. They have now decided to make their home in the borough, and that's 200 eclectic artists, which will have a big economic impact as well. And also, I suppose one of the other big things is during COVID-19, we've worked quite well with ArtsFest, who've done some incredible digital stuff, and Irish Centre. And I think one of the things that's been absolutely incredible is the members of the Arts Commission have been fully included in things like our Cultural Impact Award, which we were successful in getting, which will roll out in 2022, working with the Tri-Borough Music Hub and HQI, who are based in White City. And we've been working extensively with ArtsFest because we feel they're integral to the part of the recommendations and the success of this piece of work going forwards.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Can I just, before I call on the commissioners themselves to speak, ask if Councillor Andrew Jones would like to say a few words?
Yes, Chair, thanks. I would indeed like to say a few words, as Yvonne said. And the first thing to say is an enormous thanks to Jonathan as Chair, to all the commissioners, and everybody who's been involved in this, as Yvonne said, over 2 years. I don't think when we started out that we realised that the Commission would be over a 2-year period, as Yvonne mentioned. And of course, COVID has intervened in the middle of that. And I just want to pay tribute to the adaptation and the commitment, as she said, of Jonathan and all the commissioners who have more than risen to the huge challenge of COVID and continued to produce what I think is an amazing piece of work, which is being looked at already from far outside Hammersmith and Fulham. I just wanted to say a few words about the background. I mean, it does say that in the introduction, but for the benefit of people who might be watching, I mean, when this Labour Council, this administration came in, within the borough and beyond what the
Andrew, you're cutting out for me a little bit. Is that just me, where the bandwidth just went a bit, or was that just?
No,
just
I think
No, you've lost me as
strategy, which was a manifesto commitment to establish this commission and engage the whole of the arts community in Hammersmith and Fulham in this process, which we've now, with the interruption of COVID, reached the end of. So I think the report itself outlines a whole set of early successes. Some of these, I think, are less early successes, in relation to the recommendations. The process of this commission has really set in train a transformation of our approach to arts within Hammersmith and Fulham, and clearly there's a lot more to do on the basis of the recommendations. But when this was initiated, I don't think I imagined that there would be this level of commitment and generation of ideas that's taken place, and is evident in the report and the recommendations. And the administration's tremendously proud of the commissioners, of drawing commissioners into this process in terms of what they produced, and leaves us in an excellent place in thinking about how arts will be at the centre of our strategy forwards, hopefully as the pandemic comes to an end. So I don't want to talk too much now, but I want to hand over to the commissioners, but just to say, as the report says, what a tremendous achievement this is, and how I really think it sets us in a great place in terms of Hammersmith and Fulham's approach to arts looking forwards.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Jones. Well, really now to introduce the commissioners and to see which of them wants to make any comments at this stage. So, Mr. Church, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, thank you. While we're thanking people, I also just wanted to highlight the work of our consultants who added, if you like, the research and documentation backbone to the work we did over the 2 years, and Richard Watts, who runs that organisation, is here with us today. But we couldn't have done it without them, because they organised us through what was a long and exhaustive process. I think the only things, and 2 years is a long time to remember where we started. I think the only things I wanted to say were, I think the reason everybody took part in this was they believed in the commitment of Hammersmith and Fulham to take what is already excellent about the borough and take it forward and improve on what is already excellent. I mean, I personally, although not a resident, my first arts experiences is in London as a professional, both as an attendee at the Bush and as a maker of work at the Lyric Hammersmith. I encountered your borough very early on, and it's been part of my working life. So I've always known that Hammersmith and Fulham has punched above its weight, given it's not in the very centre of London. And this has been a very welcome process to look at what makes up the borough and the things that make it special. So what's been, I think the belief in what has been achieved and what can be achieved has been what's driven us through this long process. The report is self-evident. I think the two things that I would just draw everybody's attention to, all of the 8 recommendations are important, but I think all of it for me is based on the key recommendations 1 and 7. And 1 is about, now with the knowledge we have, making the new strategy with that information and connectivity that's been created, and investing to improve in what kind of support exists within the town hall. I think one of the most surprising findings was you have 1 arts officer in place delivering and managing an extraordinary array of existing work. And I know you have consultancy support. That's quite unusual for a borough with your impact. And so for me, the recommendation of building capacity, because it can support the artistic and economic growth of the sector, alongside the making the new cultural strategy, are the kind of underpinning key elements to deliver those 8 recommendations. So I just draw your attention to those in particular as we go along. I think that's all I've got to say. Richard, I don't know if you as our guide and organizer through this have anything to add.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. I think it's important that we hear from Victoria shortly, because she's the Arts Commissioner alongside you, Mr. Chairman, who's the voice of the programme and whose views are reflected in the report. I think that it's clear that the commissioners were really positive about their experience of arts and culture in the borough, but also threw down some challenges to the local authority. And I think it was generally understood that lots of the arts and cultural experience in the borough is generated beyond the reach of the council, and often without intercession or enabling from the local authority. And I think particularly for smaller organisations, micro cultural organisations, independent artists, there was a pretty constant focus on what might be needed for them and how the council might elevate and amplify its work in that area, as well as around supporting access. I know that's a really important area for you. So I definitely agree with Jonathan's perspective that a new cultural strategy that includes thinking about how arts and culture can address the challenges of COVID, the inequities that exist across the borough that are reflected in both COVID and Black Lives Matter, over the last 12 months. And also that need for additional investment, essentially in order to amplify and leverage all the brilliant things that are happening across the borough. I think, arts organisations and individuals who are engaged in arts and culture across Hammersmith and Fulham are really hungry for small amounts of additional support in terms of networking, enabling, some interventions around spaces and places that they can work and connect with others. Those kinds of things, I think, really came through the conversation. We were keen that we enabled a representative group of people contribute to the Arts Commission, but the Arts Commission shouldn't be seen as reflecting the whole borough. It doesn't. And I think that's why the first recommendation was for a full cultural strategy, because we didn't engage with, every artist, every arts organisation or of any scale across the borough during the Arts Commission. We were bringing together a representative group of people and supporting them with some new information and asking them to make some recommendations. I expect Victoria would like to talk about some of the things that came through that process and are documented in the report that she contributed so brilliantly to.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Jonathan. Just a few comments for myself. First of all, I want to emphasise that the commissioners came from a wide range of backgrounds. We're quite an eclectic group of people, different ages, different backgrounds, disabled, non-disabled, people who are actively involved in the arts, and people like myself who have a strong interest in the arts. I was invited to be involved because I'm chair of Action on Disability, and we have links with the Lyric Theatre. Our sessions, we had many sessions over 2 years. Our sessions were very in-depth affairs. We examined data, we examined case studies, we interviewed expert witnesses, trying to, we asked a range of questions, trying to build an understanding of what's going on in the borough and to assess what good practice is and where we should be going next. We came up with a number of underlying principles that we felt should be at the heart of arts in the borough. For example, there should be a cradle to grave approach. So from children up to elderly people, everyone should be involved. We wanted to recognise that there's already a rich array of arts in the borough, anything from Riverside Studios, Lyric Theatre, British Empire, British Theatre. We already have leading institutions in our borough, and we need to work out how we can build on this and enhance it. The challenge, as I see it, is how do we not only nurture excellence in the arts, but also how do we make sure that everybody has a chance to get involved in it? How do we make sure that people across the community can be involved and participate in it? And another sort of key principle that we wanted to focus on was the fact that we think the arts works best when the council is an enabler rather than the producer. The council should be there to facilitate what's happening. And as you may see, recommendation 5 is to work on joining up what's going on in the borough, so we can develop a really strong arts ecosystem in the borough. So those are some of the points that I wanted to make. I really enjoyed the experience. I found it very, very fulfilling, very rewarding, and I do hope that the council will look carefully at our recommendations and take them on board and implement them. I think it could really help to make the arts even stronger in this borough. And I feel strongly that the arts isn't a luxury. It's a core part of what it is to be human. And I think the arts could play a very, very key role in helping the borough to recover from the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Victoria. That was a very interesting introduction and explanation of exactly how the commission's worked and some of the stuff that you've achieved as part of that. I wonder if Melanie Knock from HF Arts Fest wants to say anything just about how you were involved, your organisation and others, in sort of contributing to the Arts Commission's work.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think for us, it's always great when a council starts on a project like this, because of course it starts the conversation. And I think for us, the recommendations are very much something that we would like to be heavily involved in continuing the conversation about. So the identification of the needs of small organisations, the recommendation about an African Centre of Culture, there's one or two others, the whole idea around sort of strategizing an ecosystem. I know those are long words which aren't necessarily terribly helpful to individual artists, but actually to put some strategy underneath what we as a festival have been trying to do for the last 5 or 6 years, which is to say there is a brilliant amount of culture going on in this borough. It is fantastic, but an awful lot of it is quite hidden and not seen and not supported. It is hugely innovative, as we saw during the pandemic, when people came out and produced work that we were able to put up online, that they did performances at no notice for an audience that was unknown, all those sorts of things, and has just shown just how exciting it can be. And the feedback we've had from some of that is of how life-changing it is to ordinary people in the borough to know that that's happening and to be able to participate in it. And the ease of access to the arts is really, really crucial. I'd like to sort of underline the importance of children and young people. We've just had a deadline on a competition for creativity for young people around what makes them happy. We've had hundreds of entries, and just the response from some of the schools, which was how happy it made the staff to see the children creating something outside the curriculum, but nevertheless, you know, within the facilitation of the school, and how important that has been to the whole school life. Those sorts of things I hope we can use this report as a springboard to see much more of. We've long talked about how important it is to have somewhere to bring together all those individual artists and freelancers and micro organisations and early career people and those who are trying to make that massive transition from doing it in your spare time to making it a professional activity, all those sorts of things, all of which is going on, and to be able to bring it together and network it and make some support and make it visible. So yes, please can we be part of this conversation as it goes forward, and take and make it a partnership so that we can really contribute what we've found from just doing it over the last 6 years into making this borough as exciting a place as it really is, but known to everybody. I think that's that's the bit that's really missing. So we'd really love to be part of that. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's what I would like to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Melanie. Councillor Jones, I don't know whether you wanted to come back on some of those points, just in terms of what the next steps might be. I noticed certainly from the report itself, it set out a lot of further conversation in each of the recommendations. There were quite a few action points that were due to be sort of done towards the end of last year or early this year, for example, as some initial thoughts, and particularly interested in the sort of your thoughts around investment in terms of the sort of team in Hammersmith and Fulham, which I think is the thing that would, I think if grown, and the extra investment I think people are suggesting here would enable some of these threads to be drawn together.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I mean the context at the moment is one, as Melanie said, of enormous challenge as we emerge from the pandemic, and I absolutely, and the conversation we've been having within the council is about the level of resource. I can make no bones about it. The council's finances are under enormous pressure in the context of emerging from the pandemic. But as Melanie said, I mean, I think this work needs to be integrated into what the emergence from the pandemic, what we're doing for young people, what we're doing for all of our residents, in terms of a joined up strategy that brings arts into the middle of the recovery. And that's a conversation that's also linked to our industrial strategy as well. In this meeting, I don't have a list of budget to say we're going to do this and this point, but I hear the message loud and clear about the need for resource, and the officers on this call, we've been having that conversation for some time, and we need to think very carefully about how we support the further investment here in the way that Richard and Jonathan talk about, because I think those key messages about joining up and about the recommendation about shouting about it, as Melanie was talking about, there's a great deal going on where the council needs to be the enabler, but join things together and let the world, both residents within the borough and beyond, know about things. Now, that clearly needs some resource, but it's also about a joined up strategy. In terms of the culture strategy, I also agree. I mean, clearly much has moved on in the last 2 years since this journey started. And Victoria and Richard mentioned Black Lives Matter and many sort of aspects of the pandemic, the crisis of mental health in terms of the way that our residents and everybody is experiencing many lockdowns, the many challenges that Melanie was talking about for young people, and I think we've got to incorporate that into these conversations forwards that we're talking about. In an adapted strategy. So, I mean, we need to absorb and think about how we take the recommendations forward. I'm not, I think there is a clear understanding about the question about resource, about joining up, about the conversation being ongoing rather than, this is not an output where it's an end of a journey. It's the thing that's feeding into the ongoing conversation as we think about how the borough moves forward with the arts as we come out of the pandemic, and how that links to our industrial strategy. So we're taking those on board. We will look to the conversations continuing. We need to think about on board a number of these recommendations and what they look like. The report's full of brilliant ideas in that respect, but we've got to work through the practicalities of how we absorb those recommendations. But I just also add that I knew Jonathan would thank Richard, but I also wanted to add my thanks in terms of the wonderful support of Richard and his organisation through this process. Having attended some of the sessions before the pandemic, as Victoria said, that the level of detail, the intellectual curiosity of all commissioners, the creative thinking through this process has been amazing. And that was, Richard has supported that with his colleagues tremendously. I think we lost the chair for a second.
I'm sorry, I had to let the cat out of the room. So that's one of those things, isn't it, in modern life? Thank you for that. Can I invite members of the committee who for any questions at this stage or any comments?
Yeah, Councillor Rowbottom has her hand raised.
Sorry, I can't see the hands. Oh yeah, sorry. Councillor Rowbottom, I can see you've got it.
Thanks very much. Thanks to all commissioners for your work on this. I just had a couple of things that immediately occurred, and I've not been very close to this work, so it might be implicit in some areas that I'm not aware of. But the first one, obviously, to be sobering, obviously, I note that you have a section on art in extraordinary times, and I wondered if you could talk a bit about the any mitigation from financial pressures. Clearly, you've talked about the council's role, but I'm aware that obviously we're not direct funding a lot of artists to do art. So I wondered if there was a recommendation or view on whether people need, skills for pitching for funds or, writing business, whatever that looks like for just immediate term financial sustainability. And secondly, I wondered related to, when we talk about the industrial strategy, obviously we use a STEAM acronym with A as the art component of that. But I wondered if artists or art organisations locally felt identified with that and felt aligned with that, or whether we need to do more work in making that explicit, because it's always kind of like the science, the tech, the engineering is always very bold from White City, and they do have arts. But I wondered if that's something that people identified with who create art locally. Thank you.
I might be able to guide us to who might be able to answer those questions. I think the second section first, just in terms of linking it to the industrial strategy. I'm not sure I quite know the direct answer. All I do know is that through some of the discussions we had on the panel about some of the more innovative small arts businesses that were growing, it's part of the recommendation to link into small local organisations. We talked a lot about how you encourage young businesses to develop their work, become, financially active in the borough, and how we stimulated that. So I'm sure you're right, a greater awareness of how they fit into that broader piece of your policy would be welcome. But I think there was definitely a focus that businesses can and have been proven to thrive, and with a little more guidance might be able to do so more. I know that doesn't quite answer the question, but it's in that territory. In terms of the first bit of your question, is there anybody who feels they can pick up on that directly? Richard?
Sure, thank you. I think I feel like there's sort of three answers to your question, Councillor Rowbottom, and there's something about what is culture good for at times like this, and how does a local authority support that? There's something about what do artists need and arts organisations, and what can local authorities do about that? And there's something about the role of the cultural ecology, if we think about that from individual artists in their spare bedrooms all the way through to the creative industries, and recognise the billions and billions, tens of billions of pounds that community brings into London each year. So I'd say that when we're asking the question, what's culture good for right now? I think we know that right now people are desperate to experience joy, to understand what truth means, what the nature of honesty and character. We need to build communities. We need to explore identity. We need to shape places and create a sense of destination management. We need to imagine a future that we're going to make, including within a climate emergency. And we need to create jobs. And arts and culture are right at the heart of each of those things. And artists do all of that work. That's their purpose on this planet, is to help us as humans to imagine futures, to get connected, to build communities. So all of that, I'd say, is part of our COVID recovery. It's because that's about community and support. If we ask the question, what do artists and arts organisations need at the moment? I think the Commission talked quite a lot about space, actually. So if we're thinking about artists and arts organisations, most of them in the borough are micro organisations. We think about the theatres and the institutions, but actually most of them are micro organisations, not even SMEs really. And so they're looking for space, they need connection with communities, they need support across that ecology. So I think there's a lot we could do that's about skill sharing. There are people across that ecology that understand different bits. Somebody's good at social media and somebody's good at developing their own practice and somebody's good at engaging young people. So I think there's a lot about skill sharing, which is, typically needed in small and micro organisations, isn't it? And then I think there's a role that the borough can play in commissioning. So all of those, because of how valuable arts and culture is, there's already other parts of the local authority that are commissioning and addressing agendas that might be about equality, might be about young people's empowerment, whole life development and learning, employability, and arts and culture has got a role to play in each of those, hasn't it? Social care. So I think all of those places, local authorities have got a role to play. And for me, that's one of the reasons that a team, an expanded team within the borough would enable all of those agendas to get so much better met by the resources and assets that you already have than is currently possible. Because the glue's missing in between all of those areas. If you do want to think, I don't think like helping fundraising is the thing, to be honest, but I'd be really interested in, if you wanted something tactical like that, I'd go for impact measurement. So arts and culture and third sector organisations more broadly have a really big impact, don't they, on people that experience them. But very often they're less skilled at demonstrating that impact, measuring that impact, making a case for that impact, and attracting funds because of that impact. So if I was going to do one thing that enabled small cultural organisations and other third sector organisations, actually, it'd be invest in the really good work that's being done across the third sector to really line that up and help people to create really strong theories of change, logic models that demonstrate the way that they affect other outcomes, and that would help them to attract social investors and other kinds of resources beyond the kind of grants for projects kind of money that is always in such high demand.
Could I just say something?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I think there's a real point about the really micro businesses where I don't think they see themselves as part of an industrial strategy. So I think that support for micro organisations, freelancers, individuals, really small people, starting out people, they see themselves as artists, and they'll only get the support they need through something which is labelled arts. It's no good labelling it industrial, they don't see themselves as that. It's no good labelling it as SOBUS in the voluntary sector, they don't see themselves as that. It's got to be labelled arts in some sense, and I think there's a real opportunity to create a network of those people, of whom there are many, to do what you were saying about skill sharing and all that kind of thing, and to be honest about how to get some seed funding, because actually they need it too, so those sorts of things. And although there is a lot of crossover, I wouldn't challenge that for a minute with other micro enterprises, whether they're social enterprises or for-profit enterprises. You've got to create something that people can understand means me, and therefore it has to be labelled arts. That's what I think.
Councillor Jones.
It was just to sort of clarify, but agree with Melanie about that. I mean, I think when I said in relationship to the link with the industrial strategy, I mean, we can carry the idea of the ecosystem or the garden too far, but I think these things coexist, and one is not subsumed into the other. And in fact, they're different parts of the garden. There is, as you said, overlap. But I think that that's why we previously had an arts strategy. So the arts is not some subsumed or sub part of the industrial strategy, but it's the fertile. We're carrying the metaphor of the garden, the fertile crossover between the two things. The other thing I absolutely wanted to say, and I don't know the answer to this, but some of the officers on the call and I spend a lot of time talking about it, and it was when Richard was talking about space, and in space in all kinds of ways for this to flourish. I mean, we are in a very particular moment where some things have changed. So we talk a lot about the physical space in the borough. We don't know what the future of our high streets look like, or our retail spaces, but they probably don't look quite like what we had before, and there is opportunity there, and we're aware of that. We're spending quite a bit of time thinking about, as we move to the sort of what sometimes called the shoulder of the pandemic, the opportunity for how we use our outside spaces, our street spaces, but also our maybe former retail spaces, our development sites in meanwhile uses. Now, I think this applies to larger arts activities. It also applies to how we think about micro organizations and the opportunities we can create as an enabler, not as not as the producer, as Richard said. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity at this moment. I wouldn't claim to know the answer to all of the ways through that, but I think this report is extremely helpful in terms of that, as you say, Melvin, that complex conversation about what we can do that's different and new, because there is a change in how the world is thinking about art in public space, in open space, in buildings that were previously used differently. And I think there's opportunity which we can take hold of.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Rowbottom, did you want to come back and say something before I call Councillor Rosenberg?
Just really briefly to say thanks for all the responses. I don't know if I was clear. I just meant the kind of immediate financial term of just survival, because clearly the value of art is manifold, and that's all covered. So the other response is just around, you've touched on it in terms of like shouting about the profile of the borough. And so I suppose why I was linking it to the industrial strategy is if we're going to create something that's sort of almost like an identity. You talked about identity a lot, but in terms of attracting people here versus other places, like it would be interesting to know, and it would probably come out in the course of the work, what it is that's attracting people here or retaining people here, or what are the challenges. It's not like it's Hammersmith and Fulham, so it's not always the cheapest place to live, etc. So I just was interested to, I suppose, what's keeping people here or preventing people from being here, or what do we need to do to sort of further build the profile of the borough. But you've touched on this in the report, but that's why I'm trying. I should stake a claim that I work on industrial strategy stuff quite closely, which is why it was very interesting to hear exactly what people identify with. And I think your point about networks, Melanie, is a really good one, because that's as good as anything. If you know a cluster of people and that starts being a collective identity, that's as powerful as anything, or actually as practical and useful as anything, because you have a collective voice for things as well. So thank you very much for all the comments in the round. They were very useful.
Thank you, Councillor Rosenberg. I think you were next. I think you're on mute, unfortunately, Councillor Rosenberg.
Okay, sorry. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, having listened to all the ethos and the energy that's been put in to create this this cultural mix in the borough, when it comes down to not only grassroots but the basics of venues, and I broached this, I think, at one of the last meetings, where do people perform? Now, I can talk from the point of view as being one of these microorganisms, because about 20 odd years ago, my husband and I started up the Brooks Blues Bar in the basement of the Brook Green Hotel in Shepherd's Bush Road. It was in 2003. And until about 5 years ago, we moved for various reasons. We were briefly in Covent Garden. We had a wonderful tenure in a pub in Putney. And we did a gig in the foyer of the Lyric, Hammersmith, and we also did one at the Bush Theatre. But in the end, venues just disappeared for little people like us. So we've hung on there, hoping that something might happen and that we could restart. Now, the community centre has got an arts space, and I'm planning to put forward a Black History Month. Now, every year with Brooks Blues Bar, we celebrated Black History Month. And the best one we ever did was actually funded by Wandsworth Council, where we actually brought somebody over from the States, and we actually had a blues workshop at a local school, which was, quite stunning. It was absolutely wonderful and uplifting. Now that's really grassroots, but operating at this level, what people want is somewhere to perform, and I don't see that anywhere.
May I?
Yeah, of course, please.
Well, only we did talk a lot about how venues change, and that, as venues like the Bush and the Lyric grow profile, what you might call the fringe disappears a little. And so there was definitely a lot of conversation, this linked into space, making performing that, you know, the more you encourage, and this slightly goes back to what why do people stay in the borough, back to Councillor Rowbottom's point, that for us it was the sort of, and it's not unique, but it's very powerful in Hammersmith and Fulham. It's having the strength of the major national and international venues with reputation, and the grassroots work that's going on, and actually a very big connection to work with young people. So it's the breadth and depth that I think is the attractive answer. But I think we perhaps discussed that in enabling space that is affordable, whether that's from people making things or work or performing it all ties in, because the problem is, and actually the Lyric Hammersmith was a very good example of this, all the spaces that were built when the building was developed became unaffordable to the very people that wanted to access it, because that organisation was so big, had cost so much. So there's definitely I think, and again, it's about organising all of this. I think we discussed, and I'd recommend that it's about encouraging the fringe as much as it's encouraging the new venue in Olympia. You've got to have all of it coexisting to make the place attractive, but also, the person performing in a pub, as the old Bush was, is the person who is going to become the next great artist or manager of one of the big venues, and you can't. It all is a sort of virtuous circle and coexist. So I think we discussed how important really making sure that people can access space to perform, to make at the right from the outset.
Okay, Councillor Rosenberg, did you want to come back on that? You're on mute, I'm afraid.
Yeah, we are just talking on so many different levels. One of the things about London over the last 10 years is that all the little venues dried up. All the pubs that used to have music 2-3 times a week don't exist anymore. So what is sad is that much of what is happening at grassroots now has nowhere to go. And we, as our Blues Bar, have always remained grassroots. As I said, we've been self-funding and non-profit making. And is there any room for people who are working on the same level as we are?
Thank you very much. We'll take that comment. I think that added to your earlier comment. Councillor Alford.
Yes, and hopefully I'm unmuted. I've got 2 questions. I think one is for Councillor Jones, and the other is perhaps a general comment. Question for Councillor Jones is: it's suggested that there should be a director and various members of staff. Is this envisaged to happen? And if so, when is it going to happen? That's one question. Bearing in mind how very strapped we are for cash as a borough, where we're actually going to find the funding to do this very innovative ideas. And the second question is more, while I noticed a lot about the performing arts, there wasn't that much that I could find, and I did read the report as in depth as I could, about what I call the creatives, the painters, the potters, the jewellers, and all that sort of people, wood turners. We didn't seem to mention anything about how they would be encouraged and helped.
Councillor Jones, going to turn to you on the first point.
I mean, so as I said before, the answer, we are indeed in a very financially challenged moment, but it is a question of finding some more resource in the coming years. Now, one of the things that I think was in one of the commission meetings that I attended, I think we need to be, and I've been talking to officers about, thinking creatively about some of the streams of funding and some of the best practice that exists around the country that other local authorities are using in supporting their officer resource. So there are partnerships, there are a number of schemes that generate a revenue stream that in part supports the if you like, the local authority's activity. I think there is some scope within certain investments coming into the borough to look at investment in the kinds of resources that Richard is talking about. Whether that equates to a director is one thing, but I think there are opportunities. I mean, we mentioned the investment in Olympia. There are quite a number of investments, not just the Olympia investment, but that's a significant one where, you know, developers and those seeking to support the arts in the borough have a mutual interest in us having a greater resource and capability. But I mean, I'm not shying away from the fact that our financial challenge is great, as you know, Councillor Alford, at the moment. I think, though, on some of the other recommendations, like, for example, the cultural strategy and our approach, and also shouting about what's going on, there are ways of reorganising how we operate, absolutely. And I think the Commission has identified some of those elements, and Richard did as well from his knowledge of what goes on elsewhere, where we can achieve a different approach in we are not good enough about communicating at the moment to all of our residents what is going on, and some of that, there are resource implications to that, but that's not the only element to it. It's about how we're going about it. So I think quite a number of the recommendations are things we have some resource we can deploy towards that and change what we're doing. And I think we do need to find some more resource, but it is challenged. So the level of that is obviously something we've got to think about as we move forward out of the pandemic. But for me, it's a priority. I recognise the scale and of our resource compared to some other local authorities, and that's a hard conversation we'll have in thinking about how we support what we're trying to do over the coming years. But I do think more resource is needed. The level of that is yet to be determined. But some of those things aren't just about resource, I think, as well, to answer your question succinctly. I don't know if I can answer the other element.
Richard, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the comment about how we define culture, I suppose, is part of what's implied, isn't it, Councillor Alford, in your perspective around potters and wood turners, for instance. We certainly had extensive conversation about that, and about the sense that we wanted to encourage the council to think really broadly about culture. So to not be just thinking about the fine arts or the kind of objects that are revered and in our museums and on our walls, but recognising that culture exists in our everyday actions, across our borough, in our homes, across and reflecting a whole range of communities and backgrounds, and that some of that's really invisible, hugely invisible across the borough, because particular communities don't have access to places to display or perform, or because the nature of their own cultural making is more private or more domestic. So we definitely want to think really broadly about culture, including those that you mentioned, and also thinking about bedroom DJs and people making video and, you know, using imagery in a digital form that might have no footprint at all, sort of physically. For me, that's where we move into the cultural strategy, to say what the cultural strategy needs to do is explore all of those needs quite meticulously and sort of put out a really fine and big net in order to engage everyone and hear what everyone needs and hear what everyone, what support people require. Whereas this was a different thing, really, which was to say, bringing together a group of people who work and live in the borough. Let's explore some themes and understand what their perspectives are as a commission about some changes that need to be made. We never attempted to kind of reflect every art form or every background or perspective. We hoped that they'd be able to empathise with a whole range of different needs and perspectives, and they certainly did in my experience. I hope that answers the question to some extent.
Thank you very much.
To some extent, but I do feel that, and I have raised this point before, as Councillor Vaughan will remember, that the people who are on what I call the artists are, in the visual sense, the people who paint and do that seem to get left out most of the time. But I appreciate there's very many ranges of culture and arts.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. I think certainly that point's well made. Richard, sorry, did you want to say something about that?
I was just going to say that one of the things we did notice was that, as I'm sure many people would know, music, theatre and dance is better reflected and well presented in the borough if we're thinking about those institutions and spaces that exist and have been invested in the past, and that the visual arts are less well invested in this borough, although on the edges of the borough you start to see more infrastructure in place that no doubt residents access quite easily, but it isn't actually in the borough. And I think it's certainly true that when we think about everyday creativity, then there are an awful lot of people who enjoy the visual arts personally, who make work, and thinking about places, including in on our high streets, where some meanwhile use for kind of community gallery type initiatives, I think are a really interesting way of both animating the high street and bringing work in. We looked at some work that was done by an organisation called Slung Low, for instance, in Leeds during lockdown, where they created a lamppost gallery where they asked residents who were stuck in their homes to send them electronic images. They printed them, laminated them, put them on lampposts, and when people were having their daily walk, they were able to move through the community and access the visual arts in a way that they never had before and see their own work displayed. So I think there's some things that we could think about doing that reflect Councillor Alford's concerns around painting and the visual arts in particular. But they do require more space if we're thinking about showing work rather than making work than some of the other art forms, for sure.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Jones.
It was just to add that I think Councillor Alford's point is well made, and this conversation has been taking place. So one of the impacts of the commission, I mean, the meetings that Richard's talked about, but I mean, prior to the pandemic, we'd already looked at Meanwhile Space and put visual art space into some of the shopping malls. Kings Mall, one example. That conversation's been carrying on. Westfield's another, in terms of, as we emerge from the pandemic. And that is also what I meant, I think. I take the point completely about the need for exhibition space, but I do think that's what is in my mind when we talk about the opportunity about how the world has changed, whether that's high street retail or whether it's even how we think about, with social distancing and being outside and how we reclaim street space in a different way. I think there's an opportunity there around the visual arts about where exactly the kind of example that Richard just gave about where you exhibit and how what you need to do to even exhibit in a meanwhile sense, and maybe it's much easier or much more amenable to many people than it was in an era when we didn't think of it in the same way before the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I do actually have some comments and questions of my own now, but can I just, in saying that, just comment that thank you for such a comprehensive report. I fear that in the hour or so that we've had to discuss it tonight, we've barely scratched the surface in some ways. Clearly, you had a huge number of meetings and some excellent background and other materials that you considered as part of doing this work. And certainly on behalf of the committee, I'd certainly like to thank everyone who contributed to this. I think it's given, without summing up just yet, the council a good roadmap for going forward, a lot to think about and much to do to try and, I think what you're saying, move from some excellent stuff culturally and artistically in the borough at the moment to make it even better and to join up the dots there. I mean, just by way of comment, certainly industrial isn't probably the word that artists would associate themselves with, but there are some parallels, I think, here with some of the work that's been done on the industrial strategy, which is bringing together businesses, and particularly smaller businesses across this borough. I think you're sort of suggesting there are, dare I say it, sort of economies of scale, effectively, of people working together, but actually the strangely, the sort of market failure, for want of a better word, is that better expression is that sort of joining together doesn't quite exist unless the council and other organisations get together to try and sort of jolly it along to a certain extent, or to ensure that sort of thing does happen, which will then enhance the ability of individual artists or organisations across the borough to make themselves better known and to enhance the things that they can provide for the borough, and indeed for us to know more about them and appreciate the work that's actually going on in the borough. So I think we've discussed that a little bit tonight. I think there's certainly more to do on that, and I think we've given a lot of work for the team that Councillor Jones is hopefully going to be able to bring together to do and to enable others to do. But I wonder if we could just touch on a couple of points, if people are able to comment on them. One of the recommendations in amplifying and celebrating diversity is about this African Cultural Centre, and the recommendation of developing that. I wonder if firstly people could talk about the genesis of that particular idea and how that might be brought forward as one example. So that would be my first point. A second point, which we've sort of touched on a little bit, was and certainly something that the committee was interested in, is the role of sort of children and young people and how they would be at the centre, or certainly part of some of the recommendations that are brought here. I mean, obviously we've discussed them thematically in terms of making more of what we've got already, but I wonder if you could comment on just those two things by way of example, which is the African Cultural Centre and how you think that working towards that might develop, and also how children and young people fit into this.
I'll start on children and young people, and then Richard. I mean, I'll only say about the African Cultural Centre. In some ways, it was a very specific provocation. We knew there was a recommendation that specific, might or might not, with further consultation, be the right way to go. But what one of the commissioners felt, as we were working on the recommendations, that we needed to respond to the challenge of something so specific. And I think as the commission felt it was passionately enough argued that we should consider it. Now, I think the broader point that diversity needs to just be placed at the heart of this is equally important. So I think that specific recommendation should be debated, but it was about bringing diversity to the centre of these recommendations. Richard, you may want to come back on that. In terms of children and young people, I mean, I think we felt there was already incredible strengths in the organisations that existed in both making work for and supporting work made by young people. So, the Bush, for example, and a number of the writers it develops are coming through the formal education system or outside, but come from definitely a younger background, and a number of their first professional works are seen at the Bush. Someone like the Lyric has a long term engagement with young audiences, both in the formal education sector and family audiences. And I suppose as we looked at what was there, it felt that by the nature of what's done, they're going to be at the heart of it. But also in terms of tying into that diversity, inclusion, they're the audience and the makers that we need to engage with, because what we do, it's obvious, isn't it? But what we do now will affect what the borough's like in 20 years, and they're the most captive, in the best sense, participants and audiences. And it's about, if you give them the right experiences now, and the borough's doing a lot that is right, it means your policy's future-proofed. So it felt that at every level, the work that was already being done and the work that has to be done needs to focus on those groups, just by the nature of making it, genuinely, across the whole borough and across all socioeconomic groups.
Thank you very much for that. Richard, did you want to come in on particularly on that African Cultural Centre point?
Thank you. And I imagine that Victoria might like to as well. I wanted to say the conversation amongst the commissioners around young people was different than I perhaps had expected, actually, which was a much stronger view on a much stronger bias, actually, towards whole life support. So recognising that very often the kinds of things that local authorities enable and the kinds of offers and provision for people across the borough drop off at the end of being young and only come back, once you might be considered older or elderly. And if we're thinking about, for instance, our social care provision, or if we're thinking about people who are disabled or who have neurodiverse, then their needs for arts and culture might be much more durational. And so there was quite a lot of debate about that question, like how do we make sure that we aren't only or constantly prioritising young people, and then also recognising that young people in the borough have a very particular need, and that things like knife crime, employability, progressions and opportunities are really, really important, and arts and culture can play a role in supporting that. So I think that there was quite a complex picture that emerged from working with the Commission. I think when we thought particularly about the cultural centre, with each of the recommendations, we were seeking to move away from platitudes and kind of good intentions. And, it's easy, isn't it, to kind of go, oh, we should, think about working in more diverse ways. We should be more inclusive. And we recognised that, particularly last year, there was quite a lot of that. There's quite a lot of kind of general statements of intent. And we wanted to think about more concrete examples. And that overlaps with this insight around placemaking, really. How does Hammersmith and Fulham have a same sense of place for national and international visitors that the South Bank does, or that soon the East Bank will, if we think about the former Olympic site? And we were thinking about institutions like Innova in Westminster and the Black Cultural Archive in Brixton, and thinking about what an institution in this, what something in this city that happens to be in Hammersmith and Fulham might look like. And as it happens, at the moment, Gus Casely Hayford, who was the director of the Black Cultural Archive in Washington, has just come back to London to be director of V&A East. And so these things feel a lot more like possible than they might be. And of course, they'd require really authentic engagement with the Afro-Caribbean communities across the borough in order to explore the kind of what that experience might be, what story we might want it to tell. But it's certain that there's a story for London to tell around its impact on the world and on its impact on Afro-Caribbean communities around the world. And there's also a very rich story to tell about the vibrant culture that lives within the borough and within the city across London. And so those things were kind of both thinking about totemic, symbolic, concrete things, but also recognising that they link to place and link to how people map parts of the city, particularly when we're thinking nationally and internationally. Victoria, do you want to jump in?
Yeah.
It's right that you should say something about all of those things.
Yeah, I want to echo what you were saying. There already is a very extensive programme of arts provision for young people and children in the borough. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, and it'd be great to see it further enhanced. But it could be argued that there are bigger gaps in other parts of our community. There are other parts of our community who are more underserved. I mean, one of the other commissioners is Natalie Carrington, who runs This New Ground, which is an arts group, arts organisation for people learning difficulties. You have people learning difficulties, older people, young parents, and you could argue all of them have greater barriers to cross getting to the arts than young people do. That's sort of the first point I want to make. And the suggestion of the African Cultural Centre, that was the point we were trying to make with that was that the arts is for everyone. Everyone should feel they've got a stake in the arts. Everyone should feel that the arts belong to them. And then the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith is a huge asset to us. And there are ways that we could expand on that idea. So yes, I think it's a suggestion, and I think it's like that you could explore.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Councillor Rosenberg, I think you've got your hand up. Did you want to make a quick final comment?
Sorry, I thought I'd lowered my hand. Just retracting a little bit. There is a new community centre being built in Fulham, which should open in the summer, and it is an arts and community centre. There is space there for performance art. We can create space for visual art, but we are also intending to establish a pottery, the jewellery studio, the stained glass, mosaic, and also introduce a Japanese art of kintsugi, which I don't think exists anywhere in London. So this is all going to be happening towards the end of the year, so that we're not completely out in the wild talking in theory, but we've actually physically got the space. So we should be able to start programming and actually setting that up, because Sands End is rather like the appendix of the borough. Nobody ever goes there. And it's not sort of brilliantly situated for communications, but nevertheless, one hopes that this will be something, to get the ball rolling.
I'm not sure that's true, Councillor Rosenberg. Sands End's a very important part of our wonderful life in Hammersmith and Fulham. Thank you all for the contributions. I think that we could probably spend much more time than we have today talking about it. Could I first of all say that how much we welcome as a committee the report that you've put together as an Arts Commission. We'd certainly like to thank all of you as commissioners for the time and effort that you put into producing such a comprehensive, thorough report that I think is going to push, hopefully, the council as part of all of this and the arts community in Hammersmith and Fulham to hopefully even greater heights than we've got at the moment, and to take forward a lot of these recommendations. They seem to provide a roadmap for this year, next year, the year, years to come, really, in terms of building Hammersmith and Fulham up as continuing to build us up as a cultural centre. And I think we would, just like to put on record our thanks for all of the hard work that's been done to get us to this place, and we hope that we can that we'll be able to take it forward from here in terms of the recommendations to make sure that they're implemented, and the vibrancy and everything else that you have pointed to is able to sort of take place. Certainly, we'd also hope that the interaction with groups such as HF Arts Fest would continue to ensure that they're part of that conversation, because this seems to be the sort of end of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end, as it were. So certainly very glad to see this report. Very comprehensive, amazing piece of work. Thanks for all that's been done. I mean, I won't repeat all of the sort of points that we've been through tonight, but I think that there is clearly scope from what you've said to for some more investment to actually, you know, multiply up in terms of bringing organisations together. So certainly very interested in the next steps. Our committee, being the Arts Committee, amongst other things, will certainly be looking closely at this, and I think there's a number of next steps. I don't know whether Councillor Jones or anyone else wants to just add quickly anything about what the next steps will be, because clearly there are some recommendations that you put for various years, and you know, a lot to do this year, and we'll certainly want to follow up in due course on specific aspects of this to sort of monitor progress, I think, with how the council's getting on in terms of trying to bring the cultural life of the borough together.
I can just add that, I mean, yes, as I said before, what the next steps in terms of we need to take the recommendations away and digest how we adopt and implement. Some have resource implications we've got to consider. Others, I think, are, as we've had early success and are things in motion, and we need to think about our forward plan for implementation. The other thing I'd say is, clearly this report's here, the Commission's here at this meeting, but given the end of lockdown and where we are, we would want to, I think, make more of this and communicate this great piece of work to more residents in the borough. And we're going to think about how we do that later in the year, hopefully when the world has returned a little bit more to a degree of normality. As we said, this is the end of the beginning. COVID intervened. It might have come a little bit sooner, and we want to maximise what we do in terms of those conversations with all of the community in Hammersmith and Fulham, but also getting the message out there. So the next steps are we're going to think about how we take forward and adopt recommendations. They have different forms, and I think also a further broader conversation about this with all the residents in the borough later in the year, and we'll think about how we do that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. So again, thank you all, including, sorry, I should have mentioned the officers who've been supporting this process, who've also been working extremely hard on this. It's a comprehensive, wonderful piece of work, and we just hope that we'll be able to sort of do it the justice that it deserves in sort of making Hammersmith and Fulham a great place to come for arts and for you know, the cultural life of the borough for its residents. So thank you all very much indeed for all the work you've done and for taking the time to come and explain it to us tonight. And I can certainly say feel free to stay if you'd like to, but equally we realise that people have got other things to do this evening as we move on with the meeting. So we won't be offended if you drop off at this point. So thank you very much for everything this evening. Okay, we'll just take a moment to get ready for the next item. Okay. So moving swiftly on, we're moving to item 6, which is tackling homelessness with BEAM. So as you'll have seen, this report in conjunction with the presentation sets how BEAM uses community-powered crowdfunding and technology to empower and support residents impacted by homelessness into employment and their own rented homes. So I think we've got Kamal Mottalib to introduce the report. I think Glendine Shepherd, who's the Assistant Director of Housing Management, will be also making some additional remarks. But first of all, I think that Councillor Lisa Homan wants to make some opening remarks on this report. Councillor Homan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief because I think that the report itself and the presentation will basically speak for itself. I don't think it needs much introduction, but it is one of the initiatives that the borough has been involved with in relation to helping people. We all know the stress of housing, we know the stress of homelessness, and we're always open to innovative initiatives which are going to actually support the statutory services that we provide in relation to helping people through difficult times. And this is a success story, and I'm really pleased that we've got a presentation on this evening. There have been a number of things since the Rough Sleeping Commission in 2017. Councillor Fenimore may want to comment on that. I mean, another initiative that comes to mind is big tap, small change. So we're always looking for things that are going to support residents who are in difficult situations. And I think this report will speak for itself in terms of what it's been doing. And I would wholeheartedly recommend it to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Homan. I'll just in a moment ask Kamal to introduce the presentation. I think it's then going to be followed by Chloe Moore from Beam. So welcome to both of you tonight. Kamal, would you like to introduce the presentation?
Thanks, Chair, and good evening, committee. And Councillor Homan is absolutely right. Beam has been an absolutely groundbreaking initiative. We were the first council in the country to work with Beam, and since we started working with them, other councils have also adopted the approach. So I'm going to ask Chloe to put the presentation on screen now. And I'll do the first part just in terms of just setting some context around what's happening in the borough in terms of our economy. And then Chloe will go into more detail to explain how Beam actually works and importantly, highlight some of the amazing successes we've had in supporting our local residents. So if we move on to the first slide, please, Chloe, that's great. So, you know, as I said, supporting all of our residents, it's really important to us, you know, to make sure that we can actually deliver on an inclusive local economy. A big part of that ambition is to make sure that residents can access good quality jobs in the local area. This graph is showing the impact of COVID on claimant counts in the borough. And as you can see, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had around 4,000 people claiming benefits. We're now at a figure standing closer to 11,000, and actually the latest figures push us just over 11,000. That's figures released in February. At the height of the pandemic, 22,000 jobs were furloughed in the borough. The figure is now around 15,000. And, you know, the borough has a massive retail and wholesale sector, which provides around 18% of jobs. And the impact of COVID has been really felt strongly in this sector. And it's also, you know, true to say that it's likely to be a sector that faces a really challenging recovery as we come out of COVID. It's fair to say that the economy will shrink. Recovery may be staggered depending on how successful we are with vaccine rollout and the impact of mutations of the virus and other factors beyond our control. And really, what happens when we have an economic downturn is that different groups of residents are impacted in different ways. So we know that some residents will have a much more detrimental effect on their economic outcome than others. So we know that young people, particularly those with additional support needs, are likely to face a challenge in finding good quality employment. We know that disabled residents or those with long-term health conditions will also find it more challenging. Those aged 50 plus, those with skills deficits will find it challenging. Workers in specific sectors, I already mentioned retail, but hospitality, leisure, etc. And obviously being so close to Heathrow, we've seen the impact it's had on the travel industry as well. And importantly, for this presentation, those who are homeless and at risk of homelessness, their journey into secure employment will become much harder with an economic downturn. We should also recognise that actually we will eventually come out of this pandemic, and as a borough, we are in a relatively strong position. We've got a large number of high growth businesses and sectors in the borough. So we've got arts and culture. We had a great presentation highlighting the importance of that particular sector, but we also have digital, creative, the wider STEM, the wider knowledge sector as well. And these sectors will prove to be more resilient during the downturn, but importantly, they'll provide good quality jobs for local residents in the future. We're already engaged with these sectors through our industrial strategy activity. We've got strong partnerships with key players, who make up our Industrial Strategy Board, as well as across the sub-region with West London Alliance. And they're all helping us to formulate and shape our strategic response. We're working much more collaboratively across the council directorates to support our most in need residents. We're building strong partnerships with statutory partners like Job Centre Plus and our local colleges. And crucially, we're strengthening our relationship with organisations like Beam, who can expand and enhance our offer to local people. Chloe, do you want to move on to the next slide? So I spoke about, the impact being uneven, and this slide just demonstrates that, but it uses age as the demarcation, if you like. And as you can see from this chart, depending on the age groups, you can see that the impact of the current economic downturn and claimant count figures is different. And, what's worth pointing out on here is that young people are facing a disproportionately high impact from the crisis, as are some of our older workers as well. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Chloe. Chloe's our public sector engagement lead for Beam, but she's going to tell us more about the impact that Beam is having on the borough.
Thanks so much, Kamal. I can see hands up already. Chair, will you be taking questions afterwards, or do you want people to come in now? Councillor Fenimore.
If Councillor Fenimore's got a comment, perhaps she might want to add something now.
She does if she could work out her computer. Forgive me, I'm struggling there for a moment. I'm very happy to come in at the end, actually, if that's okay, because I think that probably the committee will want to have a look at the extraordinary and outstanding work that Beam does. So hand back and come to me at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fenimore. Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Chloe Moore. I work closely with Hammersmith and Fulham on delivering the project, and I'll just take you through some of the amazing stories for residents and tell you a bit more about what we've achieved in the 2 years that we've been working in partnership so far. So I guess Beam, but also now, H&F's vision on this project is, what if anyone who needs a job or home could get one? We've seen a lot more people coming through the front door, approaching the council and asking for support, whether that's employment or housing as a result of the pandemic. And, we're not going to solve that by ourselves. We're not going to solve it as a council. But if we have this vision of, what could we really do to try and support people? And I guess that's sort of where Beam comes in. So let's talk you through some of the work so far. So Beam is a service for people who are specifically affected by homelessness, housing issues, or at risk of homelessness. And that means we can really tailor the support to the support needs that we know that group face. It all starts off with the individual being referred. So people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness are referred mainly by council staff. It's the teams on the front line who are approached, and they'll refer one of their clients to Beam. Or charity partners as well. So, St Mungo's, Centrepoint, other services that you're working with throughout the borough, day centres can also refer an individual. Each person who's referred to Beam is assigned a caseworker. So we work with people very closely. It's one-to-one to sort of find a career plan that is personalised to what they've done previously or what they'd like to do now, and really make sure that that job is going to work for them going forward, because it isn't just about starting a job, it's about sustaining it, because that's what's going to help someone's housing long term. And then the goal is crowdfunded. So what Beam does, we're the first platform in the world that uses crowdfunding to support people who are affected by homelessness into work. So many different financial barriers for people. It might be laptop, digital access, especially at the moment. It might be childcare. It might be qualifications and training. So we can use our platform to support people raise the money they need. And we also introduced housing into the service. So I'll tell you a bit more about the timeline and how that project works. But of course, having a job is fantastic to help people to sustain their housing. But where we can help someone as well with their housing, we've been adding in the deposit and the first month's rent. And then, of course, as I say, getting people starting work is fantastic, but it really only does have that long-term outcome for the resident and the wider economy and community if that person is sustaining work. So Beam supports people to find stable work and provides that ongoing sort of wellbeing support from their caseworker for 6 months after they enter employment. So as I have already alluded, Beam really uses the power of the public to lift people out of homelessness. So what does our work do? So I think Beam's experience cuts across users who have multiple support needs. We know people who are affected by homelessness, might have different things going on. Almost a third of people we've supported have had experience with rough sleeping. 43% of people are long-term unemployed. That looks at people who have been out of work for about 5 years or so, and that is about the average time that someone has been out of work when they approach Beam. And over half the people we support are either refugees or migrants, so supporting them resettle and use qualifications that they've already got, or maybe retraining in an area. So really supporting people across sort of multiple service needs. As we sort of said, each person gets a caseworker, so it is really personal and quite intense support to help someone start and sustain work and also move into the private rented sector. And using that crowdfunding to really help people get better access to technology, especially over this year. So the items that we can include in the crowdfunding campaigns are things like smartphones, laptops and Wi-Fi. I'm sure, sitting there, you're thinking, do homeless people have access to some of these resources? And that's exactly why we put them in the crowdfunding campaign. And then, of course, it's not just, our support, it's as I said, the power of the public. So crowdfunding, for those of you who aren't quite sure, is a model where members of the public donate small amounts of money, £1, £2, £5. This all adds up and, it gives us the total we need, which is usually in the region of thousands of pounds to support one individual. And here on the right here is Iman, one of the clients I got to support at the start of the project. And she really talks about sort of her increased self-worth and confidence. So says that, the one thing that actually affected her most was people saying, don't give up. She had about 200 messages, read them all one by one, and really great comments that really helped her succeed and went on to work as an accountant. So just a bit on our partnership so far. So as Kamal said, April 2019, Hammersmith was the first council in the UK to partner with Beam. Mark Meehan, who's Chief Housing Officer, I know he spoke with Councillor Fenimore, and they chatted about what was one of the initiatives he wanted to do in the borough. And Beam was one of those projects mentioned, and they explored it, did the due diligence, and we kicked off work in April 2019. In the first month, the model was already proven, a real success and really great resident engagement. So we had 2 clients in that first month alone launch their campaigns, Boris and Monique, both back in work and both now left homelessness in their own flats, which is fantastic. About 9 months after the project launch, we reached £100,000 in crowdfunding donations. So a fantastic milestone to reach. Then in June 2020, the pandemic was really at the height of things, and we spoke to H&F and said, what can we do, to support you and your residents? And we used the Beam platform to have an emergency coronavirus fund in partnership with the work that, H&F Can and Shield were doing, and that supported an additional 84 individuals with care packages. A month on from that, carry on innovating, spoke again to Hammersmith and Fulham. What else can we do to help you at this time? So we added in housing support to our service. So that's using the crowdfunding model, not just to help people into work, but raising funds for deposits and first month's rent. And this is George here on the right, someone who was housed during the Everyone In initiative, which was when rough sleepers were placed in their own accommodation. And George got to benefit from that scheme and now lives in his own 1-bedroom flat, which is fantastic. January 2021, we submitted an external bid for Beam to support another 250 residents over 3 years, and really looking at how we can sort of develop our long-term strategy together. So just to take you through some of the work so far, we've supported 87 Hammersmith and Fulham residents who are funding with Beam. And I think the power of crowdfunding is the really amazing thing from this project. It's at no cost to the council. It's really members of the community coming together and donating. £245,000 plus has been donated from the public. And about 10% of that is from Hammersmith and Fulham residents, which is incredible. So about £26,000 from residents in your borough. People always ask, do the crowdfunding campaigns fund? They do. 100% fund. It takes about 18 days, so very quick. And because we have that 100% success rate, we can kick off buying the items someone needs straight away. And then, of course, it's great that we, raising the money and supporting people, but of course, it really only has that impact for the individuals and for the council and overall community when people, do achieve those outcomes. So 37 people have so far started work through Beam's support, and 33 households have left or prevented from homelessness. And this is Ahmed. He was actually referred to us via Boris, who was, as we mentioned, sort of one of the early members to use Beam. And it was in temporary accommodation and now started a fantastic job at a local football club. You might be able to tell by the colour of the uniform there. But, a young man who now is in, a job that he never expected to be in at such a young age, doing brilliantly, and moved out and has his own permanent house. Another fantastic case study is Yolantite, referred by Shelley Musa, a fantastic housing officer in the link and support team. I think it's really worth mentioning at this point, it is not Beam at all who's delivering all this work. It's a real collaboration. It all starts with the housing officers working with their clients and working out what are the individual needs of the resident at that time. And if Beam is the right service, and they make that referral, and it's the housing officer who, tells them about it and helps that person really stay engaged. Just to give you a bit of background, Yolantite was sofa surfing with her two children and staying in hotels, struggling to find a property in the private rented sector whilst on benefits and with her children, and really wanted to get back into work, so she was a more appealing tenant. What was her goal? It was a job in the NHS as a healthcare assistant. And I'm sure by the photo on the right, you're thinking she's definitely back in work. She is. She's working in a cardiology unit, supporting people, and has been in that role for several months. So just to show you the campaign pages that we do on Beam for people, you can see here that she started work. We helped her raise about £2,900 from 185 people. We'll send this round afterwards. So there's some amazing things that she kind of writes there. And we find that the communities we work with, sometimes they do feel quite marginalised and really enjoy having a platform to tell a bit about themselves. And this is all done with their Beam caseworker. Fantastic messages here. Congratulations, Yolantite. Good luck. Wishing you success. Your children are very proud. Really does help people stay motivated at what can be quite a challenging time. And you can see here we've got items in here: childcare, laptop, project management course, all things to sort of help Yolantite stay in work. And she says here, I'm one step closer to my dreams. So really fantastic there. Thanking her caseworker and some fantastic comments from people who supported her. Just to say sort of where do the jobs come from? So we're working with local employers, that might be NHS trusts, local employers on there, but also work zones. So that's run quite closely by Kamal's team at Hammersmith and Fulham. Lots of brokerage, whether that's with Westfield, construction companies and local contractors. And that's really the area that we're growing. We've got 50 employers who are looking at skill shortages, their corporate social responsibility, and hiring the people that Beam are working with to employ locally. We also talked about the housing service we ran. So 33 people have moved on from homelessness or been prevented. Phoebe has secured a private rented sector placement. She was in temporary accommodation before. I think it's really worth mentioning with the Beam platform, it can look quite public, but we do anonymous profiles for people who have been affected by domestic violence, gang affiliation, anything where there's a safety issue. It doesn't stop people using the platform. Some other lovely photos. Monique, who I mentioned at the start, no longer sofa surfing after a year and has her own room. And also George, who exited emergency temporary accommodation and has his own home. This was just one of the messages that Phoebe wrote and shared with her supporters. It's really daunting finding your own place. Talked about the support with the paperwork. It all started with her housing officer at the council, letting her know about Beam and connecting her with that service. Also, something that's really important is getting feedback. So from Hammersmith and Fulham staff, we're really, it is really innovating the model and developing it together. One of the pieces of feedback we had last year was asking, people were saying, can we support with housing? And it's really great we've been able to add that in. And also really contacting people quickly. People's situations can be quite desperate and really need sort of support quite quickly. So making sure as soon as the housing officer lets us know, we can reach out to their client straight away and get things kicked off. And then, of course, and we've already sort of heard from people on this meeting, it's, constituents and residents, how do they feel about the service? Again, so we've got 9.7 rating there, people saying that the support was perfect, their coach is very patient, and really just trying to sort of pick up on where people do feel that they're not getting the support, how we can really sort of make sure that is happening through the service that we're jointly running. Just a bit on sort of social impact and evaluation. So, the costs that the council pay that are associated with homelessness are incredibly expensive, being in London and homeless generally. So, when people are placed in temporary accommodation, that can save the council up to £10,000. If someone is never placed in that accommodation, that can save something in the region of about £6,000. And then, of course, there's input back into the system. When people start working again, they do contribute to their council tax. So there's an increase there in what the council is able to sort of claim back. So far from the project, Hammersmith has saved around £280,000 from the sort of outcomes we've jointly achieved. And I think, what is really worth highlighting is that, a huge amount of that, as we said, about 10 to 15% of donations have come from Hammersmith residents, looking at ways to sort of support people. So I guess a few calls to action here is that, if you're, an organisation that hires people, whether you work in the council or you're a resident here who's thinking you'd like to get more involved with Beam, then obviously hiring local people is fantastic. So this is available. You can contact myself. If you work in a service where you're supporting homeless people in the borough, you can make a referral. There's company impact pages, there's fundraisers, and of course, as an individual, you can donate as well. So that is it from myself, but I'm very open to questions now, but really fantastic working with Hammersmith and Fulham, really innovative borough. And yeah, I'm sure a few other people have things to add, so I'll stop speaking there.
Thank you very much, Chloe. I think that Councillor Fenimore would probably want to. Do you want to add something at this stage, Councillor Fenimore? If you can find the mute button.
Sorry, long day. Forgive me. I'm really happy to be here to talk about Beam, and I will do everything I can whenever I can to talk about one of the most extraordinarily powerful initiatives that I think the council has done in recent months. And I'd really like to say to Mark Meehan, who I hope may well be on the call, a huge thank you for coming to both Councillor Holman and Iron South. I think you might be interested in this idea. It looks really interesting. It looks really exciting. And you know what? Not only is it interesting and exciting, it works. And it absolutely works time and time again, over and over again. What we see is people who are at risk of homelessness, about to end up in a dire and desperate situation, not least because of the appalling and difficult housing crisis that we find ourselves in, not least because of the pandemic. And we're seeing homelessness doing that, and we're seeing unemployment doing that. What Beam do is really extraordinary. It's about working with people to support them to help themselves. And we all know that employment is absolutely critical to alleviating elements of poverty. Being in work helps. It not only helps the individual, but it helps their families, it helps society as a whole. And I think that actually what we've managed to achieve with Beam over now quite a long period of time, and I'm absolutely thrilled that other local councils are looking at it, because it just makes total sense. Financial sense, compassionate sense, moral sense, on every aspect of this programme and this working relationship with Beam. It has been hugely beneficial to everybody. And the reason is because I think all of us have been challenged at times when we're maybe out and about shopping, sadly not at the moment, but maybe soon, and I hope so. And we'll see somebody who we think is homeless, possibly begging, and it's a difficult combination between homeless and begging, and we can talk about that another day. And we all think, what can we do to help? Well, I'm telling you now, if you really want to help people donate to Beam, because what Beam do is they give people the strength, the support, the mentoring, the emotional ability to really change lives. And I that sounds a bit trite, I don't mean it to, but it's true. It absolutely is true. And what we see here in Hammersmith and Fulham is an extraordinary relationship. And I'm really chuffed to pieces that the relationship has grown from strength to strength over the years that we've been working with Beam. And that referral pathway has been such an extraordinary opportunity for lots of people. And you've heard the case studies and you've heard the stories, but the model is just amazing. I mean, come on, it just makes total sense, doesn't it? How do we support people to help themselves? And I think the evidence and the results are there for all to see. So I really wanted to come along tonight just to say thank you to Beam for just being amazing. Anything we can do to support the work that you do, absolutely. And we do lots of newsletters. But actually, I would encourage everybody on this meeting tonight to tell everybody about this initiative, because it's sustainable and it works. So anyway, thank you for my short little bit of waffle, but I really do think I'm so proud to be part of this initiative. And I don't use the word pride very often. In fact, I'm sure if Jeff's on the call or somebody from comms, they'll be extraordinarily amazed I ever use it. But actually on this particular initiative, I think we should all be proud of the work that they do and the work that we will continue to do. And the pandemic has thrown up so many major issues. We know it, from housing to homelessness to poverty. And I can see that Beam is going to be an integral part of the work that everybody does in this borough to support people who are in that point of, you know, there's a whole saying, you're only one per year check away from being homeless. And actually what Beam doing is they come in before that one paycheck and they make a difference. So I'm really chuffed to be here. And I just wanted to say, you know, if of all the initiatives, and we've done so many wonderful things, I think Beam's probably top there in my top 5. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fenimore. Councillor Rowbottom, I think you've got a question or comment.
Thanks very much. I do have a question, but firstly, I just wanted to echo that I think this is really impressive and not only well-intentioned, but so effective. And the way that you've articulated all of the outcomes and been very clear about your mission statement and sort of the offer, I think it's really impressive. I'd like to frame the briefing note, which was part of the papers. If I could have more briefing notes like that, I would be extremely happy. So thank you to Kamal, Chloe, and I know that Julia has been on the last time we had a report, I think Julia was presenting this. So I think it's a lovely kind of like partnership being driven forth from inside and outside the council. So absolutely brilliant, thank you. And one of the dimensions of the work, which I suppose is a kind of interesting byproduct, because you've outlined all of the obvious core offer so clearly, but the profiles that you mentioned, and I suppose the network or social impact that generates, you mentioned in Iman's case, she had a lot of, I suppose, peer support. Is the social impact of that captured or articulated in your model somewhere as well, if that makes sense? And I can say more what I mean by that, but there's obviously, you've created a series of social connections as almost like a byproduct of people having this objective into working out of homelessness, which I think is very hard to capture, but actually there's a product in and of itself or an outcome in and of itself there as well, which I think is also really impressive. So yeah, just to ask around that.
Thank you, Councillor. Happy to answer if no one else wants to jump in. Yeah, so that will be something that hopefully we look to do, especially with the work with the with putting the Health Foundation bid in, is doing a lot more direct tracking of wellbeing outcomes on the project. So let me know if I'm on the right path here or not on the right one.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, specifically looking at people's well-being, and as you said, that sort of that social impact that people do get from the messages. On average, you know, people get about 200 messages and supporters per campaign. We raise anything from £500, whether you know a laptop's needed, up to about £7,000 for a resident who we were helping. You know, she had several children, needed a much bigger house, deposit, childcare, all those costs associated were quite large and things. But yeah, what we've had, lots of new features developed. Each person actually has a hub, so designed specifically for smartphones, and people can see as the messages come in, they can like and sort of interact on our own platform with people who have supported them, but also seeing other people. So not just from Hammersmith, but from all the boroughs we work with across London and other projects. So they can see people who maybe look similar to them or do a similar career pathway to them or are in a similar situation, rough sleeping or affected by the benefit cap. So really connecting people. And something we've been doing recently with some of the Hammersmith and Fulham clients is they've been coming along to online presentations and inspiring people in this borough and other boroughs and telling their journey. We kind of say almost community champions, because it's fantastic us being here saying this is what Beam does, but when you hear it from someone who's really experienced something similar to you, has lived experience and says, give it a go, because it is a little bit out there, the model and what we do. It isn't maybe your classic employment or housing service. And those kind of, we call it, team talks really, again, give people that opportunity to feel empowered. You've also got the media as well. Councillor Fenimore was on BBC at the launch of the project, but we've had a lot more since then. People telling their stories in, local and national press, whether that's for an H&F email newsletter, or for Cosmopolitan or another article like that. And again, the residents do get a lot out of having a platform to share their story in their own words. So we'll be doing hopefully a lot more wellbeing tracking as we go into the third year of the project. And it would be great to come back maybe in a year's or time and share sort of more.
Definitely, it would be so interesting to hear that, and also sort of whether you can track whether people have, I don't know, stayed in touch. I don't know what the functionality of the platform is, but it really helps to break down stigma, if consented to, which sadly, we can see this autumn that we're going to have a bit of a kind of crisis on our hands with, the furlough coming to an end, etc. So it's just, I think it's really a refreshing approach, and I think it's great. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more. Are there any more questions from other members of the committee? I can't see any at the moment. So, well, I'll take the opportunity to say, well, I was inspired certainly by the presentation, but also by Councillor Fenimore's recounting of how this project has worked. I think what you've explained obviously shows that this is a very person-centred project, which obviously looks at the individual, treats each individual and looks for the options that they've got. Clearly, public services, some public services do get a bad reputation for trying to be one size fits all, and clearly the way that you've worked with individuals here has been very impressive. I wonder though, just in terms of a couple of questions, whether you could, we talked about these referrals, and I wonder if you could just explain a bit about the criteria for people who are involved in the service, and also how it works over a period, because clearly the initial excitement, I suppose, of getting people out of homelessness and into their own accommodation stuff is clearly amazing, and hopefully that gives people the lift that they need. But what happens in terms of the tracking after that? There's talk about sort of this working for 6 months. How does it sort of progress on after that to ensure that people don't slip back into some of the problems that they might have found themselves in the first place? I'd take obviously on board Councillor Fenimore's point that it's meant to be sort of hopefully trying to get them before they get to the sort of crisis point. But how do you sort of ensure that crisis, some sort of crisis point isn't reached again in the future?
Saw a few people unmuting, so happy for someone else to jump in, but also happy to take the question, so I'll kick off. Oh, sorry, Kamal, I've seen you unmute. Would you like to take this one?
No, go ahead. I'll pick up on the point around sustainability and employment, but you might even cover that, Chloe.
Brilliant, thanks, Kamal. So with the referral, as you say, people do approach the council at all different points. Some people might, be facing, they've just been told they're being evicted from their property. Some people might have rough slept the night before, and that's, certainly a client I met. He did turn up to 145 King Street with his suitcase and was sleeping at the park the night before he had his housing assessment, and was then referred over to ourselves the same day. So people are at all different sort of, points at where they are with their homelessness, and their situation. But it's the housing officer usually who does the form and completes its very short online form to refer to BEAM, that sort of looks at a few different risks of the individual and any support needs. The main criteria we really have is that someone is work ready. We want to help this individual successfully achieve the, starting work, but as we said, sustaining it. So that is understanding what support needs that there might be around drugs and alcohol, around mental health, physical health, criminal convictions, and things that might be a barrier to employment. But by understanding those support needs, we can help people into the right career. And it's just really, done on, firstly, an honesty policy and trust with the caseworkers and the individual and their caseworker having a really human conversation, and then working in partnership with the person who's made that referral. So it might be a support worker in a hostel, it might be a housing officer at Hammersmith, and working with them throughout supporting the individual, just to make sure that we're all aligned on the support that someone needs. For some people, it's very low support, and other people do have much higher complex needs. It doesn't, the model isn't for people who are one need or the other, or any specific housing type. And then just going on to the sustainment of the project. So keeping in touch with people for 6 months. We generally find that once someone has sustained work for 13 weeks, which is when, we sort of collect, milestone data on. If someone has sustained work at 13 weeks, they generally go on to continue sustaining work. And I think what's really fantastic on this is that 75% of people who start work are still in work at 13 weeks. Which is a really fantastic statistic, so something we're really proud of, and I'm sure Kamal has more to say there. If someone loses their job in that time, or something happens, they can come back to us and we will start the support again. We've given them job support and picking up where we left off, maybe looking at why they weren't able to sustain it last time. But really what we're doing is a lot of planning before we launch someone's crowdfunding campaign, and kind of cement that plan to make sure the hours are right for them, they've got the qualifications, and it really is going to be sustainable. So whether that's part-time work starting at 16 hours or something else, looking at what is sustainable. And I think that's why it has worked quite so well. But Kamal might have something more to add there.
Just to add that, the 26-week tracking that BEAM do is comparable to other commissioned programs, DWP commissioned programs, and the 75% success rate is way up there in terms of performance for services like this. But there isn't really a service like this. BEAM's offer is quite unique. I mean, there's probably a lot of welfare to work providers who will look at the engagement figures, the job start figures, and crucially the sustainment figures, and be scratching their heads as to how BEAM are able to do it. And they do it because it is that person-centered approach, and importantly, it's working collaboratively with council officers so wider barriers can be addressed. And what we're doing now in this 2-year relationship, we're moving to a stage where we're starting to think about that lifelong learning journey for individuals as well. So great first step, get someone a roof over their head, get them a good job, but how do we actually help them to progress their career and make sure that they're keeping up with changes in the labour market as well? So that's where we're sort of evolving to now. And the really important point about recognising that securing good employment and securing good housing outcomes has such a beneficial impact on other important outcome areas for the council, be it public health related, adult social care, children's services, etc. The cost benefits really, are fantastic on a project like this.
Thank you very much. I think we're very encouraged, delighted to see the progress that's been made and the support that's been made for individuals to get them out of homelessness and to catch them before there are the problems that we all know of in terms of homelessness. Although, as you say, people are actually at different stages in terms of when they're being referred. So perhaps it's not, again, not a one size fits all, and something that's working with people to ensure that they keep out of get out of homelessness and keep out of that situation. So I think we're clearly, as a committee, welcome all of the work that's been done here and delighted to hear of the progress. Certainly, I'd sort of echo also Councillor Rowbottom's points about the presentation. I think that was very good briefing, and it was good to see the individual case studies as well, which give a sense of exactly how this programme is working. So I think, unless Councillor Homan or Councillor Fenimore wants to add any more on this, I think we would really thank you for the presentation. Really glad to see the work that's being done. Very much welcome this as a committee. Clearly, it's something we might want to look at in the future to see how this is progressing, and hopefully, having the sustainable employment that you've talked about, and really helping even more people, particularly obviously in our borough. Councillor Fenimore, did you want to come back and add anything there?
I'm not sure what more I can add, to be really honest, but I do think this model has proven to work. It absolutely has proven to work, and it works, and it gets better and better and better, and so many residents have benefited, and I can only see our relationship growing stronger, which means more residents will benefit from the work that they do. So I see our partnership becoming even bigger and even wider. Certainly, when furlough ends, I think we will definitely see a whole load of things going on, people losing their homes, losing their jobs. So I can see our relationship getting bigger and better and stronger. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to hopefully bringing back some more information for you later on, in the year, so that you can see the sustainable, and I can't make that point enough. This is about sustainability. It's about not giving people, it's about really caring about the individual and making sure that what they can do is give them all the support, so they actually don't need support again in the future. And I really think that is an extraordinary and probably slightly, and I think Kamal said it, I don't know that there's other organisations perhaps doing this, but I can see it being rolled out in other areas, can't you? So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to say yet more glowing reports about BEAM, and I really can't speak enough about how amazing they are, and what they do is extraordinary.
Thank you, Councillor Fenimore. Councillor Homan, did you want to add something?
The only thing I'm going to add is I think there was a little plug to make sure that everybody tells everybody about this. So I think that's the one message that I'd like to leave at the end of it. I think you've heard it all. I think it is really important. Spread the word. Let's make it bigger and better than it is, and we can actually help more people. And thanks everybody that's been involved in making this work. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think we'd absolutely echo that on this committee. Certainly need to let people know that this excellent project and work is going on, ensuring that people are finding sustainable employment and way out of homelessness. Is exactly the sorts of project that we would want, and obviously glad to see that we are championing it and working with the colleagues at BEAM to get those great outcomes. And we look forward to something on this coming back at a later stage. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for the report, and we look forward to speaking to you again about this.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having us today.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Without further ado, I think we've got a final item on the quality opportunity. So this is to comment on the Council's drafted qualities plan, which is setting out the inclusion agenda for 2021 to 2025. So as you know, there's been the recently launched draft equalities plan 2021 to 25 is currently open for public consultation for a 12-week consultation period until the end of April. And I think Karen Gailey is going to introduce the report, and there'll be some remarks from Councillor Fenimore.
Good evening, panel. Good evening, members. I'm going to give a brief intro to this report. I should mention that Kim sends her apologies tonight, but I'll be here to answer any questions. So the Council is required to publish its equalities objectives every 4 years. This report brings to members' attention the draft Hammersmith and Fulham Equalities Plan for 2021 to 2025, which is currently out to public consultation. The consultation was launched on the 1st of February for a 12-week period and closes at the end of April. The committee is asked to note and comment on the draft equalities objectives, which sets the direction for progressing equality of opportunity over the next 4 years. Members will be aware of the Council's public sector equality duty, which requires public bodies to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations between people. The duty applies to all 9 protected characteristics listed in paragraph 14 of the report, and they are age, disability, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, marriage and civil partnership. The Council's vision is to become the most inclusive borough in the country, where all our residents feel valued, can access all opportunities fairly, and are free from discrimination and inequality. Our work to make this a reality is demonstrated in our policies, actions, and in our passion. The proposed draft 5 key objectives, and again, these are summarised in paragraph 16, but they are that everyone in our borough must feel valued when the COVID-19 pandemic ends. Secondly, removing barriers to inclusion. Thirdly, ensuring that our services to tackle disproportionate impact on young people of the risks of street crime and exploitation by gangs. Fourthly, improving opportunities for all. And fifthly, becoming an employer of choice and fostering greater inclusion. The Equalities Plan is published on Citizen Space, which is our resident consultation platform, and also widely across a number of social media channels, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor and e-news platforms, as well as our own website. We are running open sessions for staff to join in with the conversation and the Equalities Plan consultation, and engaging schools through the Youth Council, the Secondary School Head Teachers Forum and the Inclusive Youth Network. We welcome the committee's comments on the draft equalities objectives, which will frame the Council's equalities, diversity and inclusion priorities and agenda for the next 4 years, and encourage the committee to participate in the online consultation survey if you haven't already done so. And the committee may also be interested to know that the Public Service Reform Pack is due to meet on the 7th of April, tomorrow evening, and we'll be considering 2 detailed equalities reports. One to update members on the equality, diversity and inclusion work conducted in the last year that impacts on the Council's workforce, and a wider report covering the equality, diversity and inclusion activity across the whole Council that impacts on the residents of the borough.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that. Councillor Fenimore, did you want to add to that?
Sorry, me again, but nice to be able to talk to this report, and thank you, Karen, for sharing the work that has been going on. This piece of work is not an overnight piece of work. It's a long piece of work that we've been working on consistently for quite some time. It absolutely reflects our not only statutory duties in relation to the Equalities Act, but actually it goes a bit further, and it says that equalities matters to this administration. It absolutely matters on every single level, and we've only seen over the last couple of years the inequalities that we probably, well, certainly will be finding, and the nonsense that came out from government last week in relation to racism really says quite a bit. But here in Hammersmith and Fulham, we value difference, and we value everyone in terms of their sexual orientation or their gender, or I mean, I don't need to carry on with all the lists, so you can do that. But it's an important piece of work that's been going on about access to inclusion, social inclusion. And I was very privileged and lucky to be Cabinet Member for Social Inclusion from 2014 before I became Deputy Leader, and they tried to prize the social inclusion part of my brief away from me. And I said, no, absolutely not. This matters massively, not only to every member of staff, but I think every resident as well. And I'm really excited to see so much in the document. I really encourage, where you can, to put in a submission. We really want to hear from everybody about what they believe is the right approach to this piece of work, and we want to listen to hear what everybody has to say. So I'm encouraging everybody, and I think the Commission, if they could put in a collective note or an individual note, or individuals can put in their comments. But actually, this is an opportunity to do some of the work that I think we've all wanted to do, and do on a daily basis, but in a very much more grand way. It's a big statement, and it's an important statement. Equality matters in Hammersmith and Fulham, and we want to hear from residents because we want to know what they believe about it too. So thank you for that. More from me. I'm sorry, that's me done for the night.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fenimore. Are there any comments on the Equalities Impact Statement from members of the committee? Councillor Rowbottom, you look like you were about to say something.
That's very enjoyable. I was actually just thinking, I've already commented on this in the pack I chaired last week. I mean, just to briefly summarise, I said that one of the pledges around supporting people once the pandemic ends, given the sort of iteration, well, we hope not too much iteration of COVID, but that it might be sort of just reworded to address, it's the same point, but it was just a pedantic point. I gave a couple of other points as well, so I wasn't going to raise my hand for that reason, but just wanted to acknowledge that I had given some feedback, but I'm very happy to produce something more detailed as part of this pack as well, which obviously has a slightly different lens to finance pack.
You're certainly welcome to make your comments at this pack as well, Councillor Rowbottom, in your capacity as a member of this committee. But no, thank you very much. Are there any other comments? I can't. Let me just check. Again, the perils of current situation as to okay, I can't see any hands up. I mean, I think from certainly from my perspective, I was I think we would support obviously the objectives that have been set out here, and clearly it's something that we as a pack would be particularly interested in, is a lot of the improving opportunity, objective 4, and I think that there's some of the stuff that we've heard tonight in terms of employment. I noticed the BEAM programme is one of the work streams that's already supporting the objective in terms of improving opportunities, and I think we would stress the importance of employment opportunities clearly as a way of improving equality within our borough, and clearly we've had a specific example of that tonight, and I guess there are some initiatives there in terms of employment and training that we as a pack would clearly be very much supportive of. I'm glad to see that those are included in terms of supporting equality, and probably things that we ought to be considering in due course as well as part of our work programme to understand exactly how they're working and how they're supporting better equality within our local community. Interested as well, I don't know whether you could, I mean, in terms of employment, very interested perhaps just to hear a little bit more about objective 5, which is becoming an employer of choice and in fostering greater inclusion. There's a lot of stuff that probably relates to our pack that, roughly speaking, in here in terms of employment, and I wondered if perhaps Karen, if you've got any comments that you can make around how you'd see that working in terms of becoming an employer of choice in fostering greater inclusion.
Yeah, I think that generally as part of our employment and recruitment practices, we have been striving over the last few years, particularly championed by Kim, to become a really a gold standard inclusive employer and to be leading by example. And that certainly helps the work that I lead on in terms of employment and training, and encouraging partners and anchor institutions and businesses of all sizes to be following our example. So the things that we've been doing around delivering apprenticeship schemes, work experience opportunities, mentoring, and really being at the forefront of of encouraging local residents to be part of our workforce, and a workforce that reflects our communities. I think that's the basic gist of what that equality's objective is, and to really tackle inequality, and particularly, in terms of the structure of the council and where the majority of our communities are reflected in our structures and our pay scales. I think we'd all agree there's more that we could be doing, but we really want to be the employer of choice when it comes to equality.
Thanks very much. I mean, just as a sort of comment on that, I guess that hopefully moving towards that and coming up with practices that support that inclusion and sort of diversity agenda, I guess, I think this is what you're saying anyway, Karen. It's to sort of, if we're able to sort of lead by example, to perhaps reach out and to sort of understand part of our industrial strategy, or as part of our other work, how our sort of lead in that is being taken up by some of the businesses across the and employers across the borough, I guess, to check that in leading in equality, others are perhaps following in our wake, if that's hopefully how the model will work.
Yeah, I mean, if we're seen to be taking on local people as part of our workforce and through apprenticeship schemes and other schemes, I think we can then have a good platform to talk to other big employers in the borough to say, we're doing this, it's successful for us, why aren't you following suit? And be able to point out the advantages of employing local people.
That's great. Councillor Rowbottom, sorry, did you want to come back in?
Thank you. Just to say, remembered my other point, which was one of the things we discussed in the other part, which I think is more relevant almost in this one, is just the being very data driven about identifying particularly vulnerable groups in relation to the way the economy is going to be affected in the next year. So if we take the first the first priority around essentially supporting during COVID in every in all stages, I know we've got amazing BI and some very good kind of intelligence now with businesses and many nodes into communities. So while that's very live time for people, I think a lot of the time we do a reflective, rather than us thinking about a reflective piece, let's try and have something quite live time that's responding to exactly how people are feeling the impact, who is most at a kind of pinch point, particular groups or businesses or parts of the economy, etc. That would be really interesting for us to focus on.
Yeah, we're working really closely with the BI unit to try and get that granularity of data. So, a lot of the data is lagged as well. But however, I totally agree the importance of having that real-time data so we can be much more targeted in the support we're offering. You're absolutely right.
I think that's a good point, Karen. So we sort of recognise that actually there are some groups which are invisible in data, and that's where our other intelligence comes in. But just to formally recognise that in this meeting as well.
Thank you very much. I don't think there are any further comments as far as I can see on that. Can I thank you, Karen and Councillor Fenimore, for coming along to present this draft equalities statement tonight. I think just to say clearly, we as a committee certainly welcome the statement and the objectives that are set out in it. We're interested in clearly support all of the, we think that inclusion and equality will come through a lot of the employment issues that are raised within the equalities plan, and hope that they, clearly look forward to those being taken forward. And obviously we had an example of one of those tonight with a specific example with Beam. Won't go through the all of the other points, but hope that they, to a certain extent about data, for example, can be taken on board in sort of finalising the plan. So thank you very much for presenting that to us this evening. Which I think I just in saying that thanked everyone for attending tonight's virtual meeting. As members of the committee, I hope will know, the next scheduled meeting will take place on Tuesday, the 20th of July. 2021. So that is that is it for this evening. Thank you all for taking part, and we'll meet again